I'm Dr. Heather Monthe from the About the Tea in STEM podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual host. Make sure you check out the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com. And get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
Hello, friends. It's Sam again, here with another episode of the EduMagic podcast. Welcome to episode 16. Let's get down to it. Having a college or university supervisor observe one of your lessons can be super nerve-wracking. We get it. We've all been there. Believe it or not, we were student teachers too once. We all got feedback. Some was good feedback, some was not so great. This episode is jam-packed with tips to help make that supervisor observation a little less scary and to help it go as smooth as possible. So in order to do so, I split it up into 3 different areas: before the observation, during the observation, and the debrief or after the observation. So there are some strategies that we're going to talk about that fit into each of these areas to help your observation go as smooth as possible. To find all the resources that I'm going to share today, make sure you head on over to www.sfessich.com/16. Before we get started, please remember that we are all on the same team, your cooperating teacher, your supervisor. We all want to help you be the best educator that you can be. And that's why we do these observations, to help raise you up. So let's get into it. Before the observation, make sure that you know how you're going to be evaluated during that observation time. In Pennsylvania, we evaluate student teachers based on the Charlotte Danielson Framework for Teaching, and I'll link to that in the show notes. But it has 4 basic domains: planning and preparation, the classroom environment, instruction, and professional responsibilities. And under each of those domains are several components that make those up. And when I go in to do an observation, I have a document that's up on my laptop that has all these areas up on it as well. And I write about what I observe and how it fits into each of those 4 domains. If I have a question or a comment that doesn't seem to fit really clearly into each of those areas, I have a little space on the bottom that says additional comments here. And that's where I put in something like, you mentioned a classroom management strategy. Can you tell me more about this? Your supervisor might ask you a little bit about things that he or she observes in the environment, so be ready to speak to that. Personally, I always share my feedback with the students. We have a shared folder, and I put all my observations within there, and they can go and look through them as they see fit. At times, you're going to know before if your supervisor is coming to see you that day. If you do, that's great. Make sure you have the space ready to go for him or her to come and observe you. Make sure that there's a place for them to sit and that they have a clear view of you teaching and that they can also hear you teaching. I know it sounds super basic, but trust me, they need to have a spot where they can see and hear you work your magic. And usually this is where you sit, where the student teacher sits. So make sure you have a spot ready to go for them. In addition, you might want to have, if you have extra materials and you know your supervisor is coming that day, have them available on that desk. So if you have an extra textbook, have it flipped to the chapter that you'll be talking about that day. If you have an extra handout, put that on the desk as well. In addition to your student teacher binder, ready to roll with that lesson plan, ready to go. And so they can clearly see, okay, here's the lesson plan that so-and-so is doing today. Here's the handouts that they're going to be referring to. And then here's the book that they'll be reading from today. So whenever your supervisor comes and sit down, they have all the things ready to look at. Now, some of you might not know when your supervisor is coming, and that's okay. I encourage you to get into this practice early. When your day starts, get your lesson plan binder out. Flip it to the lesson that you'll be teaching the next period. Get the handouts ready just in case. And that's always a great practice to get into because you will feel more prepared if you've gotten into this routine of getting my lesson plan out, flip it to where I'm going to be teaching today. So maybe you have that as a reference as well. You can review it before the next period. You can have all these materials out and ready to go just in case your supervisor does come. And if they don't, that's okay because you've already gotten into this practice of making sure you have all your materials and things prepared for that upcoming lesson. Another thing you want to have ready to go before your observation is a lesson plan. I know it sounds like, yeah, I know I need a lesson plan. No, but seriously, go all out on this lesson plan. Like make it as detailed as possible because this is a great way, especially if it's your first observation, to get feedback. And it's only going to help you out in the long run. So make sure you have your standards written in there, your objectives. Make sure you have what your anticipatory set is, what your closing statement is, what your closing activity is, what's your assessment, how are you going to sequence your lesson, and really put that in there as detailed as possible. So the supervisor can go in and give you feedback on your lesson planning. Like I said, it's only going to help you out in the long run. Another thing you're going to want to have, and this is something that you will be working throughout this semester on doing, is reflection. So I love going in to see a student teacher and see that they had been reflecting throughout the past weeks or the past month. I love seeing a running record of those reflections. It really helps you become an educator of excellence. And EduMagic, I share how a previous student talked about reflection, and Tom states, reflection saves lives, not just yours, but your students too. And it's so true. So reflecting on not just how did my delivery of the content go, but go deeper than that. Go deeper than what went right, what didn't go so great, what can I improve upon? Go deeper than those 3 basic reflection questions. Now, I know after you teach a lesson, you might have to go and teach the next period or the next class. So if you can, it's so important to have sticky notes available to you. Have a sticky note and write really quick what comes to your mind. What did my students meet my objectives? What could I do again if I were to reteach this lesson? How can I adapt my lesson for this student who's struggling? How can I go back and reteach or review this topic? What are some changes I'm going to make when I teach this lesson again in the next hour? What items or features of the lesson went really well that I'm going to make sure I do again? What are some areas in which didn't go so hot, but how can I refine it for next time I teach it? Other things you might want to have available in your student teacher binder. And if you're like, oh my gosh, student teacher binder, didn't even think about that. Go back to episode 15. You'll thank me later. It's all about things that you need to have in your student teacher binder. And there's a freebie to go with it so you can print out material as you need it. But some things you might want to have available to your supervisor whenever they come in to see you could be a schedule, the schedule that you teach, the schedule of the week, the schedule of that day, an agenda so they know maybe at a glance what your lessons are going to be that day so they can see, when you're teaching, what topics you're teaching. If you have any previous lesson plans that you've taught, make sure you have them in there as well so they can go back and look through. Here are the materials that you taught. Here's some great activities that you've done. Here are your assessments. And also seating charts, also really nice. I know I really like to refer to seating charts whenever I'm giving feedback to students, and I can give specific feedback regarding students in the class that I'm observing. All right, so we're going to move into during the observation. First, do not put on a dog and pony show for the sake of the supervisor. That's not going to help you, and it's not going to help your students. We want to see what you do best, and that's teach. Honestly, this part of the observation is the easiest. Take a deep breath, smile. If you need to go in the bathroom and strike a superhero pose, do it. Just teach, guys. Just teach. You do this every day, so you just have an extra pair of eyes looking and watching. And that's okay because those extra pair of eyes are going to bring a new perspective to your lesson. They're going to help improve your teaching because remember, this is student teaching and we're still learning, and that's okay. So teach the lesson that you prepared for. If it goes wrong, that's okay. We're going to talk about some ways in the debrief how we can fix and rework it. If it goes right, and trust me, friends, nothing goes 100% right all of the time. That's great too. But we're going to talk about some ways we can improve upon it or some ways we can amp it up. Remember that your supervisor during your observation, that your supervisor is giving you feedback, some positive, some glows, some areas that you were rocking, and then some areas that can be worked on. Remember, like I said, this is student teaching. This is practice. This is the only time that you're going to have another teacher in the room with you to have your back. So I encourage you to use this as a learning opportunity. A great resource, I'm going to link to it in the show notes, is a student teacher checklist, which I'm going to pop into the show notes. This was developed by thoughtco.com. But some of the areas that I like to look for when I'm doing my observation, some areas that I like to look for is, do you know what you're talking about? Do you know your subject or content area? Are your objectives tied to state standards or Common Core standards? Are the students engaged? How can you tell they're engaged? Did your students reach your objective? And that's a question I love to ask during the debrief. So make sure you can answer that. If a supervisor asks you, how do you know your students met your objective? You're able to answer that. Did the lesson plan make sense? What is your professional presence like in front of the classroom? Do you show reflection in your lesson planning? I like to see is flexibility or with itness. So can you make a change in the moment? If you see that something's not working with your lesson, are you able to make a change? That's a really hard thing to do. And I think that's something that comes with practice. If the technology isn't working, what's your backup plan? Are you able to see and read the room? Are the students with you? Are they understanding the concepts? If not, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep going through it? Are you going to have to reteach it? Are you going to be flexible in your teaching? So those are some things you can do during the observation. Just teach. Breathe, smile, you got this. Just teach your lesson that you prepared for. After the observation is usually when there's a debrief with the supervisor. Sometimes the cooperating teacher is involved if there's flexibility in the schedule. Most often it's just the supervisor and the student teacher. So this is a time where we get to have a discussion about your lesson. You just taught a lesson in front of your supervisor. Way to go. You got this. Put a pat on your back. It's done. Maybe the lesson was fantastic. Maybe there were a few hiccups. Maybe it just did not fly. And guys, whatever the outcome of that lesson was, it's okay. You will survive. One bad lesson does not mean you're a bad teacher. Remember that. It is okay if something didn't go right, but try not to make it ruin your day. All right? Recover from it. You got this. You're a teacher. You can do this. After you've taught your lesson, you've taken your deep breath, and you're like, oh, it is done. You have a little celebration. First thing, you want to let your supervisor know if there's time for you to meet immediately after the observation. We can see that through your agenda, or maybe we've set up a time to meet with you after your lesson. Make sure you ask for permission from your cooperating teacher. Hey, is it okay if I go on and meet with my supervisor during lunch or after this class? Now, if you're stacked up to teach, 2 periods, 3 periods in a row, it may not be feasible, but definitely ask your co-op. Before your debrief, whether that be 2 minutes after you're done teaching or 20 minutes after you're done teaching, try to think about some areas that you want to focus on in your debrief. This is why having, again, sticky notes is critical. So think about what are some features of that lesson plan that you rocked and you nailed it. What are some features that went really well? Because there's something in every lesson that went well, whether it be I rocked putting those students in a small group, or I had roles available for every small group and they all stuck to their roles whenever they were discussing in their small groups. Or I put on some really cool music for transition and they all got to their spots, from large group instruction at the interactive whiteboard to their small group instruction around the room. They all got to it in time before the song ended. Now, think about some areas that can be improved, because remember, nothing goes 100%, and that's okay. What are some areas that could have been improved in that lesson? Was it maybe making your directions more clear for your students, setting your expectations, or showing them the rubric of how they're going to be assessed? And then think about something that was interesting or a question that you may have during your lesson. So maybe something interesting was that one student who never speaks in class spoke up today in class, and you want to make sure your supervisor knows that. Or maybe something went wrong in a lesson and you have a question, how can I fix that for next time? Remember, this is a time for you to reflect on the areas of teaching, not just content delivery. So think about those areas: planning and prep, classroom environment, what went well in the instruction, and then professional responsibilities. It's important to go into that debrief with an open mind. Don't go into that meeting defensive. Remember that this feedback is intended to help you become a better educator. One question that I love to ask my student teachers is, was the objective of the lesson met? And did the students achieve it? Why or why not? So they can describe, here are my objectives. Did my students meet my objectives? How do I know that? Maybe it's through informal observation, or maybe it's through assessment, or maybe you did some tracking with some data. So you're able to show, yes, my students met my objective, or no, they didn't, and this is how I'm going to reteach it, or this is how I'm going to address it next time. It's so important, friends, to try not to take the feedback personally. Like I said, if you have a bad lesson, that doesn't make you a bad teacher. You just had a bad lesson. Let's recover from it. Let's talk about it. Let's move on. Just don't let it ruin your day. Recover from it and move on. Think about the feedback provided by your supervisor. It's intended to help you become a better teacher. How can you improve that for next time the supervisor comes? What are some strategies you're going to put into place so you can make sure that you understood that piece of feedback, made it better for next time? Is there a specific professional development event that you can go to in that area? Is there a webinar? Is there a podcast? Is there an article that you can read to help develop your understanding of that specific feature or area that needs improved upon? Is there a resource that your co-op can suggest in this area? So there's always, remember guys, student teaching is practice, and you can always improve and get better. Friends, I hope that this episode helped calm your nerves and helped to make you think through that supervisor observation in 3 ways. How can you prepare before the observation, during the observation, and after the observation to help it go as smooth as possible? Remember, all the show notes and some bonus resources are available at www.sfessich.com/16. Next week, I am super pumped. I have an episode ready to roll, how you can rock your first 3 days of student teaching. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Hey friends, finding a teaching job can be tough, and finding the right teaching job for you can be even harder. But don't worry, AAEE has you covered. Attend the Education Career Fair on Thursday, October 24th, 2019 from 1 to 5 p.m. at the Norfolk Waterside Marriott in Norfolk, Virginia to find your perfect match. Districts from the local area and across the country are ready with jobs to offer. Whether you're looking for your first teaching job or you just want to see what options are out there, you'll be sure to make great connections that you won't regret. And you may walk away with a copy of our trusty job search handbook for educators too. Candidate registration is always free. So go online to aaee.org/conference now.
And there you have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessich.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessich. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.